I did a report about 6 weeks ago about how the Myanmar army, also known as the Tatmadaw, had brought in troops from their notoriously brutal light infantry divisions to help put down pro-democracy protests. These demonstrations have been breaking out all over the country since the military took power on February 1st, in what is technically not a coup under the country's constitution, but is considered one by pretty much everyone who isn't actually in the Myanmar military. The Tatmadaw has an awful reputation from its decades-long conflict with various ethnic armed organisations, known as EAOs, along pretty much the entire perimeter of the country. The military has done an efficient job of keeping the atrocities it commits on ethnic minorities over the years of civil strife from the majority of the population who live in the major urban areas of Burma. Unfortunately, many of these are now getting to experience the brutality of their army at first hand. Reports of attacks on civilians have been a feature since the beginning of the resistance to the military takeover, but now it seems that many are experiencing exactly the same sort of brutish behaviour that the Tatmadaw has cultivated through its long experience. Summary arrest has become a norm, with many simply being swept up and vanishing. Soldiers and police have also been recorded as acting as little better than thugs, randomly destroying property and stealing as they please. In addition, the use of live ammunition is common in breaking up demonstrations, and more than 320 people have been killed to date. There is also evidence that security forces have been using stolen ambulances to shoot at protesters from. Even more alarming, there is also stories of the deliberate murdering of children by the security forces. The international community's attitude has been to express concern and issue sanctions against certain members of the regime. But this, quite frankly, doesn't count for a great deal, as was demonstrated when the US Embassy placed a wreath to commemorate the death of one protester. After the ceremony, soldiers arrived and immediately removed it, which pretty much sums up the Tatmadaw's attitude to all of the international concern directed against it. Alone and without weapons, the protesters have resorted to some interesting tactics, some ingenious, some not so much. One man was pictured using a potato cannon against the security forces. We can salute a valiant effort, but against rifles and machine guns, it pretty much sums up the desperateness of the situation. A little more innovative is a tactic deployed by women protesters. Aiming to block off access to security forces, they are stringing barriers made up of underwear and lungi dresses. In Burmese culture, for men to touch or pass under women's underclothes is taboo. They believe such an action drains the man of his vigour, strength and luck. Again, I don't know how effective this tactic has proven, but it certainly gets full marks for creativity. The situation in terms of with the EAOs, the ethnic forces that have fought the Tatmadaw for years, is looking somewhat improved. In Kachin State in the north of the country, the Kachin Independence Army has launched multiple offensives over the last few weeks on the Tatmadaw. This culminated in a major attack on the army's position on the strategic Ala Bum Hill, which overlooked the critical KIA supply routes along the Chinese border. Video footage released by the KIA shows stores of weapons and munitions taken during their attack. The KIA had also previously issued warnings to the Tatmadaw that they would not tolerate attacks on civilians, Kachin or not, and considered it their duty to defend any military attack. An increased belligerence is also coming from the Karen, who dwell in the eastern border regions. The Tatmadaw began increased attacks on civilian villages in the Karen areas from the date of the coup, and now there are 8,000 displaced civilians from these areas, according to a report by the Free Burma Rangers issued on March 24th. However, the Tatmadaw have recently made peace overtures to the Karen, perhaps concerned that the increased tempo of operations by other EAOs, plus the military's need to control the central cities, has overstretched them. This was publicly rejected by the Karen, who agreed to meet for talks with the army on the proviso that they stand down all of their forces engaged against protesters and EAOs, and stop killing and robbing people. That might seem reasonable enough, but is basically an impossibility for the Tatmadaw, as the Karen know. So it is basically a polite way of saying, go F yourself. Similar sentiments are being echoed by many of the others of the multitude of EAOs in Burma, But what is potentially most significant is that many of the central residents of the country are now beginning to engage with the EAOs on social media. For years, communiques by the EAOs would be shouted down or dismissed by those people as the propaganda of terrorists and bandits. But with few in Burma now under any illusion about the true nature of the Tatmadaw, this increased appreciation of the separate groups in Myanmar of one another might, just might, hold the seeds for a long-term resolution to some of the country's issues. If you want more information on what I've been talking about, there is a link in the description to an article in Military Matters.